Today, we'll talk about the two most common forms of gerrymandering you might hear about if you follow the news. To insiders and to nerds like me, they're called cracking and packing, and they're the easiest ways the two parties can use to draw themselves a big advantage. Let's visit a made-up city called Hillville. Hillville is nicely laid out in a rectangular pattern. It has 50 residents, 30 of whom are Democrats, represented by the blue dots, and 20 of whom are Republicans, the red dots. We have to draw 5 city council districts so the people of Hillville can elect their leaders. If we're trying to draw perfectly representative districts, that's easy because the partisans have arranged themselves in a neat order. And we'd expect to see a city council made up of 3 Democrats and 2 Republicans, the same proportion as the town's overall population. But what if the Democrats want to use their advantage to cement power? 5 districts in which Democrats outnumber Republicans. In this case, Democrats would expect to control 100% of the council seats, even if they only make up 60% of the population. Democrats have cracked the Republican electorate between districts. But maybe Republicans control the process, and they want to draw themselves a majority. So they take a more meandering path, and they draw 3 districts where Republicans outnumber Democrats, and the remaining 2 districts that are just crammed full of Democratic voters. Here, Republicans would expect to control 60% of the seats, even if they only make up 40% of the population. They have packed Democrats into fewer districts to give themselves a better chance in the remaining districts. Of course, in real life, we don't sort ourselves into neat little rows according to our party leanings. That would be boring. So in the real world, districts look a little more interesting. Here's the current congressional map in Austin, Texas. Austin is a fast-growing city of 950,000 people. That's bigger than a typical congressional district, so Austin should have about a district and a half. And Austin is very liberal, so you might expect both representatives in those 2 districts would be Democrats. But Republicans in Texas wanted to try something else. So they divided Austin up between 6 different districts, connecting it to rural and suburban areas in several neighboring counties. 5 of those 6 districts are currently represented by Republicans. Republicans cracked Austin between districts to give themselves an advantage. Sometimes cracking up a big city gives Democrats an edge. Here's the map of Oregon's 6 congressional districts. We can reasonably expect 5 of those 6 seats to elect Democratic members of Congress. How'd they do it? Let's zoom in on Portland, the state's biggest and most liberal city. The legislature divided Portland between 3 different districts. So Democrats cracked Portland's liberal voters in a way that makes them the anchor of 3 different districts that Democrats expect to hold for the next 5 elections. Now let's head over to North Carolina and another booming city, Charlotte. Charlotte voters are also pretty liberal, and so are their neighbors in the suburbs. But Republicans here packed all the Democratic voters into one district right in the heart of Charlotte. That helps ensure that they can divide the remaining Democratic voters in the suburbs between 4 neighboring districts that Republicans are now likely to control for the decade ahead. So the next time you take a look at a map of congressional districts, keep an eye out for districts that look packed and those that look cracked. It's the most common way both parties have to engineer maps that give their candidates the biggest advantage.